I've been looking after this trike for a few years now. Guy who owns it's a really nice guy, and I want to help him out when I can and keep this thing running, but it's not been incredibly well built in the first place. It is a Wacky's trike, at least I believe it is, that's what I was told it was, but I have a really bad issue with it. A couple of years ago he was riding it and the prop shaft fell off. I had a look at it, I towed it back and I had a look at it, and the prop shaft was too short. So I made him, I mean that was the part of his original prop shaft there. So I made him a longer prop shaft in this one. Which has worked fine for the last couple of years. But when I fitted it, I warned him that the way they've manufactured it, and I will demonstrate, the prop shaft has to basically come apart. That's the old universal joint which goes on the back of the engine. But the problem with this is it's got two sliding joints, which basically means the prop shaft is free to move about like this, which is not ideal, and it doesn't go well with the MOT because they don't want the prop shaft to be moving around like that. Now, what I've always done on my trikes, my old Intruder trikes, what I always used to do was weld one end of this so that the prop shaft consisted of a UJ at the back, the shaft itself, this front UJ, and then that was one solid piece. That would then slide onto the splines in the engine, which you can see here. That's the engine splines in there. It would slide onto the engine splines and it would use that as the sliding joint, which you have to have a sliding joint because you've got suspension, and with the movement of the suspension, the shaft has to be able to, it's only tiny increments, but it has to be able to move backwards and forwards. Now then, I'm going to show you exactly why this is a really big issue. As it is, I've had to take the swinging arm out of the bike, which has been a colossal job. I've had to slide the swinging arm back. I'm going to need to take it out completely, which is going to mean the wiring and everything's got to come off it. The reason for that is that you cannot put... Put a bit of light on the subject. You cannot put that through there, because that's the little hole they've made there. I've been trying to clean it up a little bit with a hole saw, just so that because the prop shaft has been rubbing, but there's so little space there that they've left that there's no earthly way that that can slide on through. So what has to happen is this has to go on first, and then the prop shaft has to go on to this. So what I'm planning to do, and this is horrible, but there's no other way of doing it. I can't weld this to the back of the engine. You can't pin it, you can't drill it and put a roll pin in it. It will fail every time. And you can't weld it to the engine because you will compromise all the rubber seals and all the rest of it. You'd have to take the whole thing. You'd have to take the whole thing out. Saying that, they do bolt. I think the bevel box does bolt to the back of the engine there, so maybe I will have a look at that and see if it would be feasible to weld it to there, and then have the sliding joint at the conventional place, at the conventional point, which would be that bit there. Failing that, I will have a look at that tomorrow, but failing that, I think there will probably be reasons why I can't do that. Failing that, what I'm going to have to do is take the monoshock off, get the axle, the whole axle assembly out of the frame, and then what I'm going to have to do is slide the back part of the shaft through, put the UJ on, and then weld the UJ on, so it is going to be permanently in there. So if at any time the front UJ has to be changed again, I mean, I will be putting a new UJ into it, but if at any time the front UJ needs to be changed again, it will require cutting the prop shaft, which is something I absolutely hate doing, but this is not my design, and they have not in any way allowed. See, what I would have done if this had been my design, if I'd been building this trike, is I would have made this piece, I would have got rid of all of this, and I would have made this piece a piece of pipe that's wide enough for the whole prop shaft to go through the back, which I've done on several VMAXs that I've built, and a VL 1500 Intruder that I built. But what they've done is they've used the original front part of the swinging arm, and you've got this narrowing here, and they've then made it even narrower as it's gone on down through, and you just can't, you've got to leave, like I said, this, if you leave this sliding on both joints, you just end up, even with a good UJ on it, you end up with just too much side to side movement, because you've got nothing pressing it up tight, because you've got two sliding joints. And what it ends up doing, which it has ended up doing, is it ends up battering the crap out of the splines, out of the end of the splines. They're still usable at the moment, they're still serviceable, but much longer and they wouldn't have been. So that's going to be a task for tomorrow, is somehow rectifying this. If I can make it, if I can weld it to the, if that bevel joint will come out, and I don't want to do anything to the back of the engine that is then going to render the engine unable to be taken apart for, you know, fitting spares, etc. I've got another one of these engines around the back, a dead one. I'm going to take the bevel gear out of the back of it and just see whether that would be feasible to weld to the bevel gear or weld to the splines coming out. That would then make that fixed to the back of the engine, and you'd only have the one sliding joint, which that's what you need to do. You need to cut it down to so that the two, so there's only one, and then it won't flap about. It'll just move in one direction then. So that's what I'm going to do, is have a look on that engine that I've got round the back and see if I can do something with that. So it's day 2 now of this attempt to sort this trike's problems out. What I've got is I've taken the old universal joint out, the front universal joint. To do that, I've had to literally completely dismantle everything around it, and pull the swinging arm backwards, which even that was not a simple task because this piece of frame is in the way. So where I'm at now is the only way that I'm going to stop this prop shaft. I've got a new universal joint here, but the only way that I'm going to stop this prop shaft from moving around like it does is to basically weld up the end of the prop shaft. The end of the universal joint is going to have to be welded to the prop shaft, so there's only one sliding joint, because unfortunately as soon as you start putting it on an angle, the two sliding joints start acting against one another, and you end up with the too much movement. And then what ends up happening is, if you can see the splines in the end of this one, what ends up happening is it just wears the splines out in the universal joint, and then you just end up with so much free play. And on overrun, it was literally, the rattling and shaking that it was doing was phenomenal. But the important thing is, it's been picked up on the MOT, which basically means that it now has to stop doing it, whether you like it or not. It's a case of, when it goes back for a retest, there has to be minimal movement on this UJ. And I know from past experience that if you leave two sliding joints in the prop shaft, it's going to have too much free play. I've tried, over the years, I've tried many different ways of curing this issue that you get with trikes. and we've tried drilling and putting roll pins in and things like that. It doesn't work. They will always, as it turns and it goes from the plane where the roll pin is in parallel with the shaft, as it rotates, that little bit of movement that it starts to create will just snap the roll pin, and that will happen over and over and over again. The only way to stop that is either to weld the UJ to the spline part that comes out of the engine. That is not on the cards. That is not possible. I've taken the bevel gear out of an engine that I've got round the back, and if you were to weld to the back of it, you would destroy the seal, you would destroy the rubber seal, and the rubber seal, unfortunately, you've got a bevel gear here. Straight there is a bevel gear, and the thing that holds the bearing in is pushed on to the end, to the splined end. So you can't weld something as big as this onto the splined end, because it would then no longer be able to take the bearing and seal off. So you're left with, you've got to weld it to the prop shaft. So the dilemma I've got here is, if I weld this, I've discovered a way that I can do it. I can put it on, and if you look in through that hole, I've got a lamp here anywhere. No, I haven't got a lamp. Inside this hole, this is where the bearing, this is where the taper roller bearing comes out here for the swinging arm. If you look in there, you can actually see where the sliding joint goes onto the back of the prop shaft. What I'm planning to do, and it is a horrendous bodge, but I did not design this trike, and there's no other way around it that I can figure out. But what I'm going to do is get through this hole here, and by rotating the shaft, I'm going to weld the UJ to the end of the shaft, which basically means that if it ever needs replacing again, it's going to be a case of have to cut the shaft off to be able to get the UJ off. But that's, you know, what else are you going to do? This is a piss poor design. That hole in the back here should be big enough for the universal joint to go through, but because they've used the original swinging arm, the front of the original swinging arm, the hole is tiny. It's only wide enough, it's only just wide enough to get a thin bar through. So, you know, it's just a compromise either way you look at it. There's no easy solution to this. So that's what I'm going to do, is weld the universal joint to the end and then put it all back together again, and that will be okay until the universal joint goes. You'll still be able to replace the rear universal joint, just not the front one. Such as it is. Right, so the dreadful deed is done, and the new universal joint is you can see welded onto the end of the prop shaft horribly. Hang on, just turn it round again. Just turn it round a bit. Oh no, he's all right. It's just the end of the weld is coming off the thing a bit, but it's sufficiently welded. We were just saying the only way that this UJ is coming off again now is by cutting the prop shaft at that point there and then pulling this section out of the front, but that's, unfortunately, it is a really crap design, and short of cutting all of this off and redoing it, which I don't think the owner is going to want to do at this stage in the game, that's the only alternative. So hopefully that, now it's only going to be on the one set of splines, hopefully there won't be excessive movement. This has got to be an even bigger problem now, because the prop shaft, as we've now made it and put it back in, it won't line up because it is hitting inside this piece here. Because I've turned because I've turned the universal joint round so that the point at which it was on the back of the engine, so the point would be closer to the back of the engine, which would cut out a lot of the movement by just cutting down the amount of leverage that it would put on it. It's now moved the prop shaft sufficiently that this tiny little hole that they've left for the prop shaft is not big enough. So we are now at nuclear level repair. I'm going to have to cut a chunk out of the swinging arm to make room for this prop shaft to turn, because it's just no good where it is. We have actually eliminated the movement. It is nice and rigid now, so I mean, from a MOT point of view, once it's done, that will be a fix. But unfortunately, it's just so badly made. This setup is so utterly badly made that there just isn't room for it to do what it's got to do, what it's supposed to do. So what I'm going to have to do now is cut this whole bottom section out of the swinging arm, off there and off there, get this whole section out, and then once we've got the prop shaft turning okay, I'll have to make a new section and weld it in. I just can't see any other alternative now. We're short of starting again with this. Well, not even starting again because it wasn't mine, but starting over with this whole swing arm setup. Just so utterly badly designed. It's just so frustrating.
Many months later.
Well, the shizzle got serious very quickly, and we did have to deploy a tactical nuke. So get ready for a bit of a shock. That's what the axle now looks like. We literally could not get the shaft back out, as I knew we wouldn't be able to. So we had to go tactical nuclear. And it's just as well I did, because when I took the shaft off again, I discovered the rear shaft, the rear UJ, was actually completely seized up, which is why you can see all these rusty piles of crap all over the floor. There's the actual universal joint that came out. You can see it's seized up on two of them. that's probably what destroyed the front one. So I've now had to rebuild the shaft again. So what I'm going to do now, well, I'm going to go home now, but what I shall do tomorrow is, using this steel tube, I'm going to cut this shape. I'm going to cut away the steel tube in that shape and weld that tube in, instead of all this bits of crap. I can't believe what a bad job they've done of it. I can't believe it. I mean, if you look all over the floor, you'll see there are bits of chopped off steel everywhere. It literally had been attacked with a gas axe, basically. It was all just bits hanging, and the shaft barely fitted through there. And like I said before, you were on a hiding to nothing when it came to getting the UJ out. We had to take the axle off just to take the old UJ out. And I think I've probably already shown the old UJ, how worn and battered he was. But yeah, I've had to take so much of the bike apart as well to get this contraption out. What a nightmare. You can see how I've been inside it with angle grinder and die grinder, and tried to get rid of most of the unnecessary rubbish that they'd left behind when they hacked this thing, when they put this thing together. I can only imagine this was just simply a case of get a back end on it, get paid, get out the door. So I've now cut out this whole chunk of nasty, and I've fashioned out of a piece of 3mm thick tubing, I've fashioned this repair patch. I made a rough template and then put it onto this piece of tubing, and I've cut the shape out and just roughed it out until I've literally arrived at this point where I've just tacked it in, and to all intents and purposes, here's the prop shaft. I can now, with the UJ welded on the end of the prop shaft, I can now slide the prop shaft in from underneath. And get it to come right the way through. Locate it on the flange at the back, and with the UJ in the center, I've got plenty of clearance here now, plenty of clearance there. So I've now made it so that you can change the UJ if need be. Which is an altogether better way of doing it. So I'll just get on with welding that. So I think I've just about finished the welding on this one now. As you can see, I've braced it up as best I can. The limitation of this design, which obviously I didn't build, this was a Wacky's trike, but the limitation of this design is if you're going to go on the original mountings and you're going to use the original prop shaft tunnel and you're going to use the original suspension in here, you've got no room for any bracing. So like I say, it's putting a lot of strain on these bearings, especially on this one, on this side. But I've done the best I can with it. You can't utilize this space here to put any bracing because the link arms for the monoshock have to go there, and you can't do anything around here because it's this frame and spring and monoshock and everything else in the way. So all I've been able to do really is strengthen up what was already there. This weld that they put up through here was awful and there was no penetration, so I've re-welded that, and I've got my own weld there, and I've welded it up onto the thicker plate here, and I've also overlapped most of this to give it a little bit more strength. The steel I've used is thicker than that, but you can't go much thicker because it's just pointless. You know, if you end up putting a big thick steel plate in onto, say you put a 4mm plate onto 3mm thick steel, it's just putting more strain on the 3mm thick steel. It's not doesn't add any strength to it. So I'll just lightly linish that, I think, because I don't want to take too much of the weld away. I'll just lightly linish it, flick some paint on it, and then try and get it back in. I've just spent biggest part of 2 hours looking for the bush that comes out of this linkage, and I couldn't find it, and I've just started to consider making one, and I just thought, let's just have a look at the linkage itself. So I'm looking at the linkage, and very quickly realizing it's been running without a bush all its life, or at least while it's been a trike. Look at the bolt, the wear on the bolt, where he's been running, where the bolt has been running on the taper roller bearings. Well, it hasn't, because it's just been so murder tight that the suspension hasn't been working. So I'm hoping that's not going to mean that the suspension cannot work for a reason, like they didn't get the travel right, so they've just taken the bush out so it would go a little bit lower. So anyway, I'm going to make a bush to go in there, and then just hope that that doesn't encounter another huge design flaw. So here it is, back in its living quarters, tightened up. It's all fitted, so it's now just fingers crossed. We see if the prop shaft will go back in. It's in the hole. That's a start. It's more than it was doing. I'll take it to a position where I can. With the UJ now, the UJ is in the right place. Okay. Right, UJ's on. Tell you what, it's still damn close. I don't think it's touching. No, it's not touching. And that's good, because as it moves up with the suspension, it'll move further away. So, in theory, it should work. Well, it doesn't get further away because it goes with the suspension, of course, but it is clearing. So check that with the lamp. Definitely, there is definitely clearance there. It's not touching there. No, plenty of clearance. Thank God for that. It's getting tightened up. that job's finished. It's back together. The swinging arm's working. It's in position. I've put all the ancillaries back on. I've still got one more thing to do, is the piece that went there. I need to redirect that up to there. That's the cover somebody's made for the prop shaft, but the prop shaft is now, there's no movement at all. It's absolutely perfect, and it turns and doesn't hit anything, so it's not scraping, it's not going to rattle. So that's that job done. Now I've got fork seals to do, clean the rotor, probably change the pads, and then I've got to look into these rear brakes, why the rear brakes don't work, because the rear brakes are as good as not there. Could just be contaminated shoes or something along those lines. I mean, it has been MOT'd before, so I imagine that at some point the brakes worked. Anyway, that's a job for another day.